Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this afternoon's talk. I've got to say, I was expecting 20 or 30 people. That number was well surpassed, so it obviously identifies the level of interest in the subject, and hopefully we're going to do it proud. We still have people who are attending, so there'll be people will be added as we continue. What I'd like to say is that because of the numbers, what we've decided is that everybody will be muted, and we've cut videos for people. And what we'd like to do is, if there are any questions, and I'll go through the content, but if there are any questions, then during that process, or during each phase, there'll be times to ask questions. But I would like any questions to be written, please, and if they can be sent to Valentina, who you will see on the chat as being the co-host for this event. That would be helpful, because I won't be able to remember everything. We may very well have lots and lots of questions. We're up to 180 people on the call already. So what I want to try and do is make sure that it flows and we can get through the information, and hopefully it's going to be a benefit to everybody. So I'll give it one more minute, and then we'll look at starting the content. As I say, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Andy Davis. I'm not an academic. I'm a security practitioner, and I've been involved in the security sector for 20 to 30 years. As I've said to those who were earlier on the call, thank you very much for taking your time. And I'm hoping that the information that we share and discuss this afternoon will be of benefit and of help and assistance to yourselves. I'd like to just go through the reasons why I thought it important to host this event. And obviously there was the tragic event in London with the murder of Sarah Everard, and that was followed by protests in London, where it became very obvious very quickly, that people were concerned about their safety and their security. And on that basis, I took the decision to host an event for free. And the reason being, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm a son, and I wouldn't want any member of my family to be hurt, male or female, and any help that I can give in reducing or potentially reducing the risk of harm, potentially preventing an attack from occurring, then I think it's only right that I took that action. The support from across the security sector for this event and many other similar events has been really outstanding, and I think I can speak collectively when I say that the security sector wants to help as much as it can, and this is my small way of hopefully helping, even if it's one person on this call. If we can prevent you from becoming a victim or reduce the likelihood of you being the victim of violence, then to me this afternoon is time very well spent. What I will say is that it's advisory in nature. I'm not an academic. I'm not going to say this is what you should or shouldn't do. Hopefully what you'll find is the information I give is sensible, is pragmatic, and it's useful to yourselves. And again, if that can be used and thought of in that manner, then it's a great help for me. Nobody has all the answers. I can't protect everybody, and I don't think there's any. There isn't one program in the world that can prevent violence. I have had questions asked of me, why is this for women? and purely it is because my account, and you'll see from the video that it's Trident Manor Training Academy. The only reason for that is that was the only account I had that would cater for 100 people. Never in my wildest dreams did I expect that we would get 350 people registering for the event. So thankfully, by using that account, I was able to increase the numbers, and thanks greatly to Zoom, because they supported even further and increased the numbers. What we'd like to do, and again I've mentioned it earlier, is if anybody has any questions, there's going to be a number of different segments to the presentation which I'll go on, which I'll discuss. At the end of each segment, we'll stop and pause. If you can write in the chat, if you can write your question to Valentina, who is the co-host of this event, that would be great, because then we can actually get through a lot more questions during the process, rather than me stopping and starting during the presentation. As I say, I'm hoping that it's of benefit to yourselves. I feel passionate about being able to protect everybody. When we talk about this is the Personal Safety and Security Workshop for Women, to be truthful, the content is very similar, irrespective of whether it's male, female, young, old, irrespective of colour, diversity. The personal safety and security comments and content is the same and can assist and support everybody. It may very well be that we will hold a future event if there is the desire, and hopefully if everything makes sense to yourselves. So before I move into the text, into the main content, for those of you who don't know me, what gives me the right to sit here and talk about safety and security? Is this yet another sales pitch? Well, firstly, it's definitely not a sales pitch. I'm going to do the utmost that there's no reference to my company, and I think it's a fair question. What do I know? What does anybody know about personal safety and security? Somebody has said to me, well, a female would know more about personal safety and security. In some contexts, I agree. In some contexts, there are going to be people far more qualified than myself in articulating specifics. I've got 2.5 hours this afternoon where I'm trying to cover a broad brush approach that's hopefully going to maximise the benefit. My background is military, and it is police, and in both these roles, or in both these occupations, I was involved in personal safety and security. I became a diplomat, and I was responsible for the safety security of males, females, family members, children, of diplomatic staff, those locally engaged staff, and that was everywhere from East Africa, Latin America, Pakistan. And in the corporate world, lots of my activities have been in support of organisations' duty of care, their travel risk management programmes, keeping families safe and secure. I don't say it makes me an expert in personal safety and security. It makes me very experienced, and I believe it makes me able to offer some balanced advice for you hopefully this afternoon. So with that in mind, what do I hope to achieve for it today? Well, really it's threefold, three primary things. Firstly, it's awareness. I would like to make sure that I can help you understand and be a bit more aware about the problems that exist, and also how attacks occur. Second part is understanding situational awareness and the part it plays in everybody's personal safety and security. I remember many years ago, one of my mentors said, if anything else, maintain your situational awareness, it will help keep you safe. And I agree with him. It to me, it is the cornerstone, it is the foundation of good personal security. And then I want to give some practical advice that will hopefully mitigate, minimise your exposure to violence in public spaces. Now, if we were talking about violence specifically aimed against women, to be truthful, we could have a week-long workshop and still not cover all of the key areas. So I had to try and focus in some specifics. And the specific areas that I wanted to look at, or the specific area I wanted to look at, was in relation to when we're out and about in the street. Okay, and that's, to me, it's one of those where it's important that we can cover that aspect, because that seems to be in many cases where there's lots of fear. The other side is that actually, there are many experts, there are many programs, government support for domestic violence, workplace violence, lone working, and all of them are actually very, very valid. But in the time that we have, it will be very difficult. The final point I would like to say is that I am recording this because there's been lots of interest of people who can't make this event. So I hope people don't mind, but I'm going to record the presentation and then I'm going to share it again free of charge to people who want it via YouTube. And I know that there's some parents who've said they want to spend time with their teenage daughters to go through any content that we have. So again, if anybody has any objections, please could you let Valentina know, but I hope, because it's educational in purpose or in nature, that there wouldn't be any objections. So, moving on. What are the contents? Well, the first thing I would like to do is put things into context, because there are times where reality differs greatly from perceptions, and I think it's important to put things forward so that we understand a bit more about the reality, and that's not to say that the emotion is taken out, but I want to put things in a more balanced perspective. Now, the data I'm going to use is that for England and Wales, and it's up to the end of March 2020. And that's the latest data that's available from reliable governmental sources. Then I want to go talk about how attacks happen. That then leads us on to situation awareness, and then proactive protection practices, so simple things that people can do. Then, after each of these sections, there'll be a short Q&A if anybody has any specific questions. But then I'd like to have a broader session towards the end where we can open the discussions or the debates a bit wider. I'm not really up to date on technology, but I'm sure that we may very well then on the Q&A session be able to open things up where we have the video and everybody else is able to see. And then finally, I'll do a conclusion where we'll bring it all together. So if that's what I'm hoping to do, I'd like to start then in the actual content itself. So really, the first thing is putting things into context, and I'm a male, and I have to say, certainly some of the statistics that I've seen, and I've no reason to doubt them, is men are the problem. Men are the problem. They are instigators in 90% of violent acts against women. Equally, they are instigators in 90% of violent attacks against men, and 90% of violent attacks against women. So there is a problem. There is a problem with men. As I said at the start, I'm not I'm not an academic, and I can't really talk about specific research that's been done in relation to that, but I can talk as a man. And I can talk as somebody who was a police officer who saw victims, and I can talk as somebody who tries to protect people as a man. So whilst men are 90% of the problem, then what we have to identify is that actually the solution, there's a large proportion of the way to reduce this is addressing the males and have them included. There are others who are really involved in great deals of research, who are looking at academic studies, at medical studies, and all things like that. Home Office are involved. That's fine. What I'm hoping to do is to give us some advice and guidance that can help us breach that first stage, so that individuals don't become victims. As well as men, there are other influences on violence, and I've seen this around the world. I mean, obviously, if men are responsible for 90%, then I think it's fair to say that the other 10%, if we're looking at the way the statistics are drawn up, would be women. There are other influences. For example, the social environment in which people are living, and that includes deprivation, unemployment, the economy. It includes crime levels. It includes the social acceptance of what is normal, and what is normal is a very valid point as we go through the presentation. The legal aspects can impact violence, and the legal aspects is, are the laws robust enough? Now, what I will say is, this was primarily aimed at people from the UK, but I do know that there are people from Asia, from the Middle East, from Africa, from across Europe, from the Americas who are on this call. And so again, I won't apologise for using the UK, but the influences are going to be similar in each of your countries. But looking at the legal aspect, how robust are the laws? What about sentencing? Is there a deterrent there that will prevent acts of violence from occurring? Police, and do the policing have the resources? Do the policing have the trust? Do the policing target different areas of violent crime, or are some areas accepted? Now, I'm not saying any of that in relation to the UK, but I'm just flagging up the question because I know in some countries where there's higher levels of corruption, that actually the police are a significant part of the problem, because they're involved in organised crime, or they're corrupt, or in some places they're involved in people smuggling. Now, these are just broader influences, and I suppose the last one that I would like to cover at this point is culture. Now, we talk about when I was a lad, so in the 1980s, violence there. Well, actually, violence was there, and sometimes different cultures, there's different cycles that occur within cultures. But one of the worrying things for me as a parent, but also as a security practitioner, is areas in inner cities where, to a degree, gang cultures are influencing activities that are happening. Now, gangs have always been around. Take the craze in the 1960s. They carried out violence to a high degree. But what we're looking at now is a slightly different context, in that there's almost been a glorification to some extent, and in some arenas, of violence and activities carried out by gangs. And these are, again, potential influences on violence. It makes, it worries me, and as I say, it worries me professionally, and also worries me, on a personal level. Do I get concerned about violence? Yes, I do. I get worried about violence for myself. I get worried about violence for my children. I get worried about violence for my elderly parents, if they're going from the shops, because I don't see it getting any better. But actually, that's my perception, and my perception is sort of tainted, because the reality is slightly different. What I'd like to do is, again, using statistics from the UK, show you some slides. So, from the mid-90s, from 1995, violent crime has reduced, and this is recorded So I agree, people will say, well, statistics, but generally speaking, if there's a trend and the trend is continuing downwards, then that bears out semblance to reality. So what it's shown is that from 1995, there's been a 72% decrease in violent crime. And within that violent crime, there's been subcategories. So violent crime without injury accounts for 41% of those incidents. Violent crime with injury accounts for 31%. Stalking and harassment account for 28%. Murder, homicide, accounts for 0.04%, 0.04% of offences. So that's putting things into context. And as we say, it's showing that the largest percentage of those violent crimes is violence without injury. Now, violence, and I'll say this repeatedly throughout today, violence is not accepted. It's not acceptable except in very, very narrow fields, and I'll mention them a bit later on. But violence, we should do everything we can to reduce it as a society and to prevent it as an individual. Just continuing on with some more statistics, and what we say is that most victims of murder were actually men. Most victims of violence without injury were women. Men are more likely to be victims of violent crime, 2%, than women, 1.3%. However, in specific areas of violent crime, for example, domestic violence, women are 0.3% more likely, domestic violence accounts for 0.3% of women and 0.1% of men. And the final slide that I would like to show regarding some statistics, and this to me actually does say it all, and it's the relationship between victims and suspects. And what it shows is that against females, you have 49% of the aggressor, of the suspect, and bear in mind these are just reported. These are not the ones that don't go reported, but 49% are an intimate partner. That is a massive figure. We have 22%, or 21% should I say, are other family members. 22% are acquaintances, and only 8% are strangers. So what does that mean if we do it? The likelihood? Well, you're 6 times more likely to be the victim of violence from an intimate partner. You're 2.5 times more likely to be the victim of violence by a family member or an acquaintance than you are from a stranger. But in many cases, the fear from an attack by the stranger, because of the unknowns, appears to be far greater to an extent, and I do caveat that. But what this chart shows to me is that, generally speaking, the streets of the UK, of England and Wales, are relatively safe. The incidents of violence carried out by a stranger are relatively low. The perception of violence appears to be far higher than the reality. And as I said, when I started this section, my perception, even as somebody in the security profession, similar. It's far higher, and it could very well be through underreporting, non-reporting, etc., etc. However, looking at the trend over the years, I think I'd like to try and add a degree of comfort and a degree of reality that there are places around the world, and I've worked in many, where the incidence of violence against individuals and against women is far higher than it is in the UK. And I think the general statistics there will be borne out in many countries, not all, but in many countries. So if that's a sort of overview of the statistics, I suppose, and I want to concentrate on the stranger, the next question is really, what does a stranger attacker look like? Because if we know what they look like, then surely we can avoid them. We can take proactive steps, and this becomes quite easy. Unfortunately, and I love showing my little image of the Hulk. We humans, our bodies are such that we don't turn green before violence. That would be marvellous, because that could give us a red flag. That person is about to be violent, they've turned green, I can take real proactive steps to avoid it. Unfortunately, because we're human, that isn't the case. And the reality is that anybody, any one of us, male, female, could be that stranger. Young, old, from any ethnic group, from any race, any religion, we cannot profile, or I certainly would never want to try and profile what an attacker looks like, because I think it's too difficult. So somehow we have to address the problem. But addressing the problem isn't easy, because this 2.5 hour presentation is not going to address the wider problem. Any skills that you as an individual will have are not going to address the problem. They might reduce, and that's what obviously we'll hope to do, some of the problems, the impact of some of the problems, but really addressing the problems is going to involve the wider community. It's going to involve changes to our social well-beings. It's going to involve changes to legislation. It means that men are going to have to change, policing may have to change, and culture that exists in the wider community. All of these things are what's needed for change to happen and for true reductions in violence to occur. As I say, I can't achieve that, and I don't know of any presentation or any country or any government that has the answers. It's a work in progress, and it will continue to be a work in progress, because we're never going to eradicate violence. Okay, but the more the governments address it in the longer term, and that's the problem, it does take time addressing the bigger problem, then the more there has to be self-reliance on individuals to take a degree of responsibility to try and make sure that until that happens, until the problem is addressed, that we can protect ourselves. And really, in a nutshell, that's what today is all about. I want to try and give you some tools as individuals, as parents, as carers. I want to give you tools that you can use, or that may help you in proactively identifying potential points of harm, potential risks that exist out there, that you can take steps yourself to try and prevent yourself from becoming a victim of violence, and to avoid proactively and as much as you can the risks that you're able to identify and as I say, and hopefully address in a proactive manner. So it is our responsibility for us to take care while we're waiting for governments and others to hopefully get their acts together and proactively reduce the levels of violence even further that exist. So that is the first part of trying to put things into context before we then move on to onto other aspects, and I'd say the first part being, or the second part being how attacks occur. So what I'd like to do is, if there are any questions, and Valentina, were there any questions? So what I'd like to do is, if there are any questions, and Valentina, were there any questions? Yeah, yeah. One of the other things, and again, I'm lucky. I have a team who work with me. Is we will explore whether or not to create a handbook that will accompany this presentation, and a lot of that will be down to whether there's the demand, and also whether we've got time within our resources to do that. But as Valentina mentioned, the idea is that I want to be able to upload this. That's the reason why the call is being recorded, so that we can upload it and share this with everybody. And again, as long as people are happy, what I can then do is share it to all attendees as well as wider, but at least then you'll have the specific links that exist. Great. Well, what I'd like to do is move on to the next slide and then the next part, which is how do violence attacks happen? Bit of a Pandora's box. We could say, well, there are so many reasons, and there are. And so, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about some triggers that exist. And again, I'm looking at this from a female victim perspective, but also I would then want to look at it from a process perspective, and that sounds very formal, but hopefully I'm going to informalise it and let people understand what I mean, because it really is important that we understand how violent attacks can happen, because there's an old saying, forewarned is forearmed. Well, if I know what's going to happen, I can take proactive steps to avoid it. Sometimes, and as has been shown from the statistics, it's difficult when the victim is known, or the victim and the aggressor are known to each other or are intimate with each other. But some of these triggers, some of the triggers I'd like to talk about, are equally as applicable. And as I say, we are talking about the stranger types of attack primarily, but please think broader. And what I go through in the next 10 or so slides may actually be relevant, and you may be able to identify in yourselves, in your colleagues, in your friends. So a number of different triggers that potentially exist with regards to violence and violence against females. I've just listed some here, but control. We've heard the saying, and again I've witnessed it. Abusive, controlling, manipulative relationships where the male has to have the power and exert absolute authority over the female. And there's nothing right about this. It's completely wrong in the world in which we live. But what I'm trying to identify here is different triggers that can lead to violence. And it could be that the aggressor is wanting to control the female. and that can be those in relationships, but also stranger. It could be that they want to exert their power over that individual. Ego could play a part, and pride could play a part. And if we take the next one, rejection, if a male has been rejected by a female, their ego and their pride could be hurt. That could be a trigger for violence to be instigated. Not saying that it's right at all, but that could be a trigger in that individual's mind as to a justification for them to carry out that attack. Equally, these apply to male and any other identity that people have. An aggressor. These are triggers that impact aggressors. It could be that there's that infatuation with an individual, and again, there's been a rejection. And as part of that infatuation, they want to control, they want to have the power over that individual, and their only means of exerting that power is through violence. It can come down as personal as hatred of an individual. For whatever reason, the aggressor could hate that individual for actions that they've done, for things that they've said, for something historical, from their upbringing, from where they live, for any reason. But the violence could be an absolute hatred of that individual. And again, I say these can be male or female. And I'm not using these as excuses now. I want to flag that straight up. But intoxication, whether through drink or drugs, does impact individuals in different ways, and that could be the trigger for violence to be carried out. I do know of lovely, calm, quiet people, and then you put drink into them, and it's like a Jekyll and Hyde. They're a totally different person, and they become violent. They become violent against male or female, whoever their victim is, and whatever triggers them to actually identify that individual as a potential victim, or as a victim who they want to hurt. And the last one that I'm showing there is mental health. And again, we're not saying that there's none of these are justifications, but it could be through mental health or through an illness that violence becomes a way of expression and a way of targeting either harm or introduce it or committing acts of violence for whatever reason or whatever justification. There could be mental health or medical reasons for them doing that. So if these are different triggers that can impact or that can be a cause of violence, I mentioned a process. Now, for those of you who are security professionals or have been involved in terrorism, the study of terrorism, you may very well recognise the different stages that I'm going to talk about, and you may very well say, well, you're missing deployment, because deployment comes between 2 and 3, and that's correct. However, what I'm trying to illustrate here is a criminal approach, and in many cases it's very, very similar. The actions and activities that are carried out by a criminal can transfer, or carried out by a terrorist can and do transfer into criminal activity. So you'll also see that between the planning stage and the attack stage there is a gap. Well, actually that gap is surveillance, and we're not talking about the police conducting surveillance, we're not talking about high-end surveillance and multiple teams. But surveillance can and does happen, and surveillance can and does happen in acts of violence against third parties. So what I'd like to do is just talk in a bit more detail about each of the stages. And when we talk about target selection, the triggers that we mentioned earlier, they in themselves could be part of the target selection and as a causation. But one of the things that criminals look for, like animals in the wild, is a vulnerable victim. How many of you watch David Attenborough or some wildlife shows, and it shows the lions and the tigers identifying the zebra that's away from the herd, or the single fish that's swimming away from the massive shoal where there's protection in numbers, or the injured animal who people or the attacker can see, okay, it's easy for me to get to that person. The target selection, when we look at vulnerable victims, it's because the aggressor believes that they are going to actually have a likelihood of success. That they are going to be able to overpower, that they are actually going to be able to implement whatever their thought process is behind attacking that victim. So a 20-stone guy may identify a female who is 10 stone, and he may feel they are vulnerable to me because I can overpower them. Whether that's a fact or whether that's factual is neither here nor there. But when it comes to target selection, the aggressor, especially when we're looking at strangers, will want to identify somebody who they have got a strong likelihood of succeeding. And it could be that people become the victims of violence, the next stage, for financial gain. And again, when we look at financial gain, is that theft, stealing somebody's mobile phone? Is that financial gain through robbery, where weapons are used? Is it financial gain through kidnap, through ransom? There could be a reason for them choosing that particular target, and that reason could be financial gain. It could be that the person is targeted for sexual exploitation. Now, whether that be for assault, rape, degradation, or the weaponization of that violent sexual assault. It sounds very dramatic, and I'm not trying to build up the levels. I'm trying to be realistic as to what could cause that target selection. And in some places around the world, certainly far more so than in the UK, this is a very regular occurrence. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen in the UK or that it isn't a problem in the UK, but the weaponisation aspects, etc., are far greater elsewhere. So that could be a reason why somebody is targeted. And it could be under instructions. I know that's supposed to be an assassin. We were debating whether to put Assassin's Creed, but identified that I've heard of Assassin's Creed, but I haven't got a clue what it is. But it could be that somebody has been paid to carry out an attack. We have seen and we have heard of acid attacks being carried out against third parties. That's a violent attack. So it could be that somebody, either out of revenge, out of hatred, issues an instruction for somebody to carry out that violence. It could be opportunistic, that somebody is there and somebody just decides they want to carry out a violent act, whether that be an injury attack or whether that be non-injury attack against an individual. And again, that will come back to triggers and what causes them to carry out an attack. And I suppose the last one that I would like to flag up is post-incident. And what do I mean by post-incident? And I think one of the best examples is following the outbreak of COVID at the start of 2020, there were cases where people were being targeted because they were Chinese or appeared Chinese in nature. And so the accusation is, you've brought death and destruction to the rest of the world. And that, as a trigger, ended up with people being targeted and actually being the victims of assault. So there's just a quick overview of some of the reasons why people could be targeted. What I'd like to do is just talk about the planning stage, and if I was a criminal, what sort of things do I consider during the planning? Well, firstly, like with the target selection, I want to make sure that I'm going to be successful. So I want to identify somewhere where I can control. I want to identify somewhere where there isn't people overlooking what I'm going to do. I want to identify somewhere where there's no CCTV or there's very limited passing traffic. So location of violence, and again, if we're looking at this in the context of a stranger, it can play an important part of the planning. Equally, if it's a known associate and it's something that's happened because it's emotionally based, there could be no selection. It could just be there and then. But again, as part of the planning stage, is there a need for me to use any weapons? Is it going to be my fists, my hands? Is it going to be bladed weapons? Is it going to be acid? Is it going to be firearms? All of these are a tool that are used in violent attacks. The timing of the attack. Okay, well, I need it to be a successful attack. I need it to be a rewarding attack. So if I've identified the location, what's the best time of the day for me to carry out the attack? Is it during rush hour when there's hundreds of people around who can witness, or is it after somebody's been to a pub or somebody's been to a restaurant and they're walking down a narrow alley after 9 p.m. because there's limited footfall? So part of the planning stage may actually identify when's the best time for them to carry out the attack and to be most successful. Equipment, and I mentioned that briefly, subject to what the type of violence is. If it's just purely gratuitous violence without any further intent, it will normally just be the weapon. It could, however, be, if it's sexual in nature or it is for kidnap, etc., that they think about what tools, because they want to control that individual. They may want to bind them. They may want to stupefy them, so that they can take that control to carry out any acts thereafter. And I suppose finally, in most cases, they want to look for, am I going to be able to escape this if disturbed, or once I've carried out the attack? So these are the sort of thoughts that take place during a criminal planning stage. And you might think, oh, this is out of this world. This is terrible. The world's a bad place. This is happening all the time. That's not to say that an attack is going to happen. We've talked about the statistics, but these are the sort of thought processes that a criminal can go through when it looks at planning an attack. When we talk about surveillance, and I showed that surveillance can take part in everything from target selection right through to the attack, well, it can be static, so they can be sat watching an area, a point, watching movements in and out, watching somewhere where there is the potential for their targets, because that could be their selection process as to why they've chosen that point. It could be whilst on foot. Unfortunately, we can't see very well on that image, but it could be that they actually follow somebody, and that's their way of conducting the surveillance. And obviously, when we think about violence against women, one of the big high-profile aspects of this is the stalking and harassment that occurs. It could be the use of technical, and nowadays drones are taking photos and images of everything. I've spoken to people and they've got these very small cameras disguised as pens. It could be that they're actually sat on a park bench with a video camera. Or it could be a combination of all of those put together. Now remember, I showed the image of surveillance being conducted, so I suppose the question that you quite rightly could ask is, what's the purpose of criminal surveillance? And this is not rocket science. It's to obtain detailed information about potential target. It might be to update information they previously had. So they might have identified somewhere as being suitable, and they want to go back and verify that it's still suitable, in their eyes, a target-rich environment. It could be that they want to establish a pattern of life. You know, what time of day does Mrs. A go to a coffee shop for a coffee? What time does she leave? What time does Mr. C go to the pictures or to that particular pub? So this is criminal surveillance in general, and it can and does occur certainly in relation to violence. To confirm the suitability of the target, you know, is that individual really the person that they want to attack, or would there be a better target, or a target who would not pose as much of a risk to them as possible? And then really their intent is to actually look at ways of to ultimately carry out a hostile act. You know, is there any police around? Are there CCTV cameras? Can I get away with the action that I'm about to undertake? Taking us to the next stage, the attack. Attacks, as I say, can be in a wide range of forms. Characteristics of a criminal attack and of violence is that it's fast, it's sudden. They're normally seeking the element of surprise, if it's for financial or other external gain. If it's gratuitous, it could be that they're they're full on against you. But not, you know, normally speaking, if it's a stranger, you know, they would want to seek the element of surprise because they want to win, they want to overpower. And that's the thing. It could very well be that extreme violence is used because they desire to overpower and control the victim. Escape could be by whatever means possible. It could be on foot. Interestingly, I'm showing a picture of a speedboat here, and somebody said to me, nobody escapes on speedboats. Whilst not violence related, we do know of a museum where some crown jewels were stolen, and the escape was via speedboat. So it's used for illustrative purposes, but they'll want to escape, and as part of the escape, they want to exploit. And the exploitation certainly may be the sale of stolen goods, financial gain, or on a more personal level, it could be self-gratification and ego, or it could be the actual act of violence itself. So just trying to give you as an example, that's an attack cycle, but putting it into a criminal perspective. What I'd like to do is just quickly give you an overview. Now, this guy here is Gary. Gary uses crack cocaine, and obviously he needs to feed Gary's habit. He has a long criminal record, and you know, he's from a poor family. He's never worked in his life. Now, I'm not being stereotypical. That's just the scenario that I'm using in this particular case. This is Sheila. Sheila's a student, and as a student, she works, or so she studies at a college in an inner city, and she's very studious. She leaves the college sometimes 8-9 o'clock at night throughout the year. Now, it might be light, it might be dark. When she comes out, she's normally either reading a book or she's on the telephone, but she leaves and then she'll go and take the train. On a Thursday night, as part of the planning stage, he sees that she always goes to an ATM and gets some cash out. And he knows that from the ATM to the train platform there's an underpass which is well lit, but it has no CCTV. But he decides that actually, because he's quite short in height and Sheila's quite tall, he's going to use a weapon this time. But it's only to frighten her because, of course, she'll hand over her purse. He decides, he's done his planning, he's conducted the surveillance, he's comfortable that his attack will be a success. So he carries out the attack. Unfortunately, Sheila actually responds, and as a result, she's injured by the knife, and Gary does steal. He does get away with her purse, and she is injured, suffering a knife wound to her arm. He escapes exactly the same way that he came, because he knows that he can then get and hide in the crowd, and he makes his way to his drug supplier. He scores some crack cocaine. As far as he's concerned, it's been a success. Now, yes, I am adding the violence with a criminal act of robbery, but it's for illustration purposes, and this is the sort of process that can. And as somebody who's interviewed literally hundreds of offenders, in many cases the pattern is borne out. Okay, so I'd just like to give you that as an illustration. So the question really is, why is that relevant to you as individuals, and what part can that really have to play in stopping yourself from being a victim? Well, firstly, what I'd like to do is here, if you understand how an attack can occur, all of us can take proactive steps to actually reduce our own vulnerability or reduce our target attractiveness to the individuals. So, how can we do that? Well, firstly, by not being there in the first instance. Does it work? Yes. Am I saying that you should live in a concrete bunker, never venturing out, have your food shipped in, and you'll never be the victim of crime, or never be the victim of violence? The likelihood is greatly reduced. It doesn't mean to say that you're safe. And what sort of life would you have in the meantime? So you would be surviving as opposed to living. And I want to live. I want to enjoy the life. I want to spend my time with my family. But one of the things to think about is, if you're not there, then the chance of you being a victim are greatly reduced. The second one, our owl, being alert. Being alert, and this we will come on to in situation awareness, is really, really vital. Being alert as to what's happening. Being alert as to your surroundings. Being alert as to your activities. Okay. Next stage, the routine. Try not to be predictable. There's nothing easier than, if somebody is targeting somebody, being able to establish that pattern of life. So I know that at 9:30 every morning you will leave the house and you will go for a run in the park, and this is the route that you will take. You will come back after an hour and a half. You will then get ready. You'll go on the number 7 bus, and from the number 7 bus you'll get off at this stop in Durham City. When you get off at this stop in Durham City, you then walk half a mile to work. You'll stay there till 6 o'clock. You'll go and have 2 drinks in the Slug and Lettuce, and then you'll get the bus back home. That makes a criminal's life so much easier. Mix it up. Try to be unpredictable. It's not saying that you're letting them control or rule your life, but be mindful of your activities. And is it the potential that you could be making yourself predictable? And if you are, think about the other aspects that we've talked about how they target, where they target, activities that they do. And again, that's something that we'll come on to. The next stage is being in well-lit areas. Is there really a need for you to go down a dark alleyway when you go one single block around and there's a fully lit street that's got loads of natural surveillance, there's a taxi rank there, people can see you, and there is mutual support? If I'm a criminal, I want to do something and I'm a stranger, I want to do something that there aren't any witnesses. Well, if I'm in the middle of a high street where there's lots of traffic, there's people living, then you're going to reduce that likelihood of being able to get away with that, which in itself might be a sufficient action for you to take. Being groups. Oops. So there's a group photograph there. Being groups, like everything in the animal world, there's protection in numbers. The moment you deviate from that group, you potentially are going to be vulnerable. Support in numbers is a great thing. That doesn't mean to say that, again, you restrict your life and you never go anywhere by yourself. But it's a case of thinking about what you're doing and thinking about your activities. Now, this next image, and we've had some internal debate on this. Now, I've showed a lady and I've shown her with jewellery. Okay. What I'm saying here is avoid making yourself a target. Now, I'm not saying if you want to wear whatever clothes you want to wear, I'm not saying don't do it. But what I am saying is, for example, if somebody is wanting to feed a drugs habit and you have a Cartier watch or you're waving a wad of £50 notes around, you're going to attract a criminal's attention. Okay. If you can actually continue your life keeping a low profile without drawing attention to yourself, without potentially making yourself a target, there's a great deal of success. Now, I've lived and worked in countries around the world where by my colour I was a target because the perception was I was rich, and as such steps had to be taken. So would I walk by myself as a male and down the streets of Kampala late at night? No, I wouldn't, because I know that I would put myself in danger. Getting a taxi to and from point A to B, well, actually that was okay because it helped me reduce the risk that I faced. And the last image there is avoid danger areas. If you knew that there was thin ice, would you walk on it? The answer should be no. If you knew that there's an increased likelihood of crime, certain types of crime taking place in different areas, would you still go to them areas, or would you try to avoid those areas and take a proactive action? I would hope that you would do the second. It doesn't mean to say that you stop your life, but you consider what's happening and whether or not you're putting yourself unnecessarily at risk. So these are simple things, but if you think about it, during them 5 stages that I showed you of the attack cycle for criminals, if you do any of these, there's a great likelihood that you will disrupt any planning that's taken place. You can disrupt any surveillance activities. You could actually make things so difficult or to the point where they don't see you as a vulnerable target and they actually choose a different target and go elsewhere. One thing that, with regards to the attack cycle, and certainly when it comes to risk assessment programs, what I always tell the students is, if you want to, think about where your vulnerabilities are, or you want to understand your vulnerabilities, take a moment just to think like a criminal. And it's amazing how often people stop and say, actually, if I was a criminal, I would do A, B, and C. And if you can identify these potential vulnerabilities, and it means that you can actually take proactive steps to avoid them. I'd say think like a criminal. It lasts 3 or 4 hours, and people really enjoy it. And I have to say, some of the thought processes that are imagined by some of the people who come on the programs, even I'm thinking, why are you a lawyer? You should be a criminal mastermind. But it does help, because if you can identify the vulnerabilities, again, it means you can be proactive in how you protect yourself through avoidance. Don't put yourself at unnecessary risk of harm or of violence. And if you think, okay, a criminal will target me at this point, this will be their attack point, I'll avoid it. I won't go down that dark alley because there isn't a need. I won't park my car where there's no street lights and away from everybody to save myself 50 pence. I'll actually park it in a well-lit car park. I'll park it where it's very close by where we're going to spend the night. I'll park it where I know it's got this sign secure that it's a great car park. That's why I think it's important that people understand how attacks can and do get carried out. I think it's important if you can understand and put yourself in the mindset of a criminal. Now, I'm not saying that stop your life and think, okay, before I do A, B, and C, I want to think like a robber. I want to think like. But what I am saying is, consider your actions, your activities. Consider what a criminal would think. Are you putting yourself in unnecessary danger? And if the answer is yes, take proactive actions to actually avoid those activities, or to take a different course of actions if you can, and if it's safe to do so. So that brings us to the end of that section. Does anybody have any questions before I go on to situational awareness, which I think is, as I've mentioned already, without doubt the cornerstone of good personal safety and security. So are there any questions, Valentina? Right. So the hatred of women. You look at the dictionary. At the dictionary definition of it, it's the hatred of women, and some people just by default hate women. I can't say anything other than that's what it is. It's not something that I can see any rationale. But equally, I can't see any rationale for hating somebody because of the colour of their skin. I can't see any rationale for hating somebody because of how they identify themselves. To me, every human is a human, irrespective of their colour, their skin, their approach, or even their attitudes. We live in a different world, but there are people out there who hate women. It's difficult because, and again, this is there are people on this call who I know who are far greater experts than I don't even class myself as an expert at all in this. But in relation to domestic violence, and in many cases, when you talk about an intimate partner, you are talking about domestic violence. But when you say think like a criminal, okay. The stages I've shown you relate to a stranger attack. The emotional triggers in many cases relate to somebody who is a family member, an acquaintance, or an intimate partner. And it becomes very difficult. If you can recognise different triggers in the individual, then that is something that means it's going to potentially give you a breathing space and identification that an act of violence may be occurring. The one thing, and I've seen domestic violence, and I've seen the impact of domestic violence. And the one thing I would always say is anybody who knows that their partner is violent and is going to be violent against them, there is help. Please seek that help. Please, you have to keep yourself, and invariably you have to keep yourself and if the children safe as well. As I said, there's a great deal of study a great number of studies that have been taking place with regards to this. So you might not be able to think like a criminal, but that thinking like a criminal is with regards to how strangers can conduct their acts. But if you think about the trigger mechanisms in an intimate relationship, they can give you an early indication. And there'll be other things that I'll discuss when it comes to conflict avoidance that may again help early identification of acts of violence. I hope that helps. So, technology is a wonderful thing, and if you imagine, one of the vulnerable points that you will always have when you go out into the street or you return is at your point of entry, because if somebody has conducted surveillance on you, they may see you leave the home, they may watch you return to the home, they may decide that their point of attack is going to be as you return home. Now, I'm not speaking as a police officer. I'm not speaking evidentially. I'm speaking as a practitioner who wants to prevent an incident from occurring. Okay, if we can prevent the incident, then you don't have to worry about statements and police records and things like that. So, do doorbells work? And do they work remotely? Yes, they do. And I was a bit sceptical, but having seen a relative's doorbell and the fact that they can watch, people coming up to the driveway, and having seen the adverts on the telly, I can understand where it works and I can understand the benefits. Equally, if you have them in the back garden and you have it all remotely linked to a handset, to your mobile device. Because it can help, you're using technology there to help give you that advance warning, to help increase your levels of awareness of something that's happening in your area. Now, speaking as somebody who used to be a diplomat, do I like technology, especially, and if it comes from a country of potential disrepute or a country where they could have intentions of espionage intentions against us, I don't particularly like them. But from a human, personal perspective, I don't see any harm in them. I do see benefits. Are there any more questions?
No, there aren't.
Lovely. Thank you for them questions. You've almost caused me to start sweating. What I'd like to do is to move on to situation awareness. So, situation awareness, I've mentioned that. I think it's probably one of the most important skills that anybody can have with regards to personal safety and security. And certainly it's something that I've used all over the world, and I've seen the need for it all over the world as well. It's not just something that's of use internationally, it's something that's of use here. And I'll outline a story from 2 nights ago where situation awareness did play a part with myself. So what is situation awareness? Now I'm going to give 2 definitions. Well, 2 different scenarios including definitions. So situation awareness, the definition: by using sensory stimulus, an analytical process takes place which determines whether what has been presented is one of normality or not. Now, firstly, it took me about 10 years to be able to remember that, and that really, that resounds, I understand that, and it really, what it's saying is, understanding and responding to what your senses are telling you. So actually, it's sometimes easier saying that instead of the full one. But what's important about that full definition, and I don't know where it originated from, literally, I've used it so much, but when I've tried to identify the source, I can't, but I refuse to remove it because I think it's so good. And the important aspect for me with regards to this definition is whether the situation that has been presented is one of normality or not. And that really is important to me, because what it's saying is use your senses, and really use your senses to identify whether there's, is there anything that's changed? Is what's presenting itself in front of you normal? So I suppose some realities with regards to situation awareness, and there's, I've got old tiger. You see the zebra there looking at the tiger because they identify them as a threat. And originally, it was a naturally occurring phenomenon, and it was built in sensory mechanisms where mankind was both the hunter and the hunted. So this was the old fight or flight syndrome. Most people are not aware of their surroundings and are what's known as a victim state. I think the first time I heard that was a friend of mine, Peter Constantine, and Peter has been a real advocate of personal safety and security for many decades. But what he means by that is that you're walking, you're talking, you're living, but actually you're not really functioning, and you're not using your senses to explain what's happening. And over the time, situation awareness now has to be taught. We don't use it as it was originally designed. And so people like me have to come and say, okay, let me remind you about situation awareness. Here's how to do it. Because we're at the top of the food pile. The only thing that attacks man is man himself. And when we're talking about violence, then that really is important that we understand that. The one thing I would say is that the people who we find are most situationally aware are criminals and terrorists. That's because while they're conducting their acts, they don't want to be caught. If they're undertaking surveillance, they don't want people to know that they are conducting that surveillance. And so therefore, they are aware of police presence. They are aware if somebody is paying them extra attention. And that paying of them of extra attention may be sufficient for them to actually leave the area and even abandon their criminal plans. So that's the realities. But what does situation awareness include? And I've tried to break this down so that it's a bit more easy to understand. And really it's about interpreting what your senses are telling you. Okay? And when we talk about sense, we're talking about not just about sight, but sight is the primary one because it's something that most of us are able to see and in advance. It talks about hearing. Can you hear something? Are you hearing the scream or the sound of a child? That could tell you, your situational awareness is telling you somebody could be in danger. When we talk about touch, if you touch something, a kettle that's just boiled, that heat is going to tell you that that's hot. Okay, so it's using your senses to actually help you interpret what your senses are telling you. It ensures that you remain alert and vigilant, and this is really important when we talk about personal safety and security, because our concentration levels can lapse. We can be alert one moment and then all of a sudden we can be vigilant because we can see the tide run in, but if the tide goes out, it's okay. I don't have to worry. I'm not gonna be swept away by a freak wave. But situation awareness also helps you understand your environment, and with that we mean the built environment. We mean the area that you're operating in, the area that you're passing through. Situational awareness means attentive. So don't be dismissive. And I always say, it's great when you look, but are you really seeing what is in front of you? And in many cases, people don't, because it's an automated function and they don't identify the threats or potential threats until it's too late. And situation awareness, good situation, is remembering what's happened. Did I see somebody parked in a car wearing an orange top? And did I see them twice? So good situation awareness, it includes all of these different factors. Now, back in the day, this guy called Jeff Cooper, he devised what's known as the Cooper colour codes. And I'm quickly just going to go through them. And there was 5. And this all stemmed from police officers having their firearms taken away from them and used to kill themselves. So he was asked to do some research. It was interesting what his findings were because, like I said, he identified 5 stages. So condition white was where 99% of the people spent 99% of the time and they weren't aware of their surroundings or what was happening in their area. Condition yellow is where he identified that people were attentive, they were looking at what's happened, and this is where people should be 100% of the time, so they can see and interpret at the earliest opportunity when something isn't right. Condition orange was where he identified and analysed the potential for harm, increased threat, and he says this is where your thought processes should be related to what if. What if this happens? What am I going to do? He identified the condition red was, okay, what I thought a condition orange was, if this happens, now it's happening, I must do something. And he also identified that those who did nothing, unfortunately, ended up being the victims. Now, I've been using these colour codes for 30 years, but it took me a very long time to understand them. So what I always say to people is, think of the traffic lights. Is what you are presented in front of you one of normality? Is it normal everyday life? Or is there anything that could potentially be suspicious or that could lead to danger for myself? That's condition, that's in green. If I see something that has the potential for danger, then actually the amber is my alert levels identifying that and taking the steps to do something about it, to start thinking about what if. And red is, okay, it's happened, I must do something. How am I going to actually prevent condition worsening, harm being executed against me? Okay, I have to take them actions. Now the thing is, when you walk down the streets, I'm not saying that you become paranoid. I'm not saying that you're looking furtively at everything. What I am saying is, look at something, and if you identify, well, there's potential for harm there in that individual. If, however, as you go further, you find that there isn't harm, that's great, because you've gone from green up to amber, but you've dismissed it, and it's a mental process that's taken seconds. It's not a minute. You haven't got out a risk assessment process, but it's looking and being able to identify the potential sources for harm so that actually you can take proactive steps to avoid, manage or mitigate them before they come to fruition. Okay, sorry about that. So using these colour codes, that's an easy way of thinking about it. So let's put this into practice. So when we look at the image there, what we have is Valentina on a bridge. So it's daytime, and yep, she's on a telephone, and she can see quite a distance up, so she would be able to see if anybody was there. For her, that's normality. That is a normal situation that presents itself. What about this scenario? So here we go, we have a group of 9 kids. Where are they? What are they doing? And what activities are they involved in? Do they pose any danger whatsoever, or are they actually just hanging around? But by asking yourself these questions enables you to either say, yep, they're okay, or identify them as a potential threat. And if so, what do? Do you avoid where they're walking? It could be that they're actually all bunking off school and they're around the back of a factory unit which is warm and nice and handy for them. And that could be all they're doing. No harm whatsoever. And it's something that you're able to look at and identify, but you're processing that information. Now, what if you saw this image? So the question firstly would be, where is it? Now, where it is could impact whether or not it is that's normality or it isn't normal. And if that isn't normal, then what is it? The second question would be, is that really an AK-47? Is that really a hand pistol? And is that really a knife that the individuals have? If you saw these in front of you, if these were presented to you, then actually your situation awareness should be able to interpret and identify potential harm or danger from that image. If it's viewed as normality and these are actually kids who are protecting your street and your area, then you can actually bring that bring that level down. Okay, so is what's presented one of normality? If you don't know the area, if you don't know individuals, it could very well be that you see this gentleman and you're shocked. You don't know whether or not, is this normal? Is he singing? Has he actually been drinking all day and has now come out and he's there? Does he actually have a medical condition and needs help and support? We don't know. Is that one of normality or not? It may very well be that it's not one of normality, but once you assess it and you identify that, okay, it is normal, and actually I see this gentleman there every day, then again, you can go from your green, increase it to your amber, subject to what you're seeing, what your senses are telling you. Dark alleys. Okay, you can see this. Is this somewhere that's safe? Are your senses telling you that somebody could be concealed down this area and you really want to walk down this alleyway? Equally, you have a well-lit car park and are your senses telling you that actually my car's safe, me getting to and from my car in that area is relatively safe? So that is presenting what I view as normality and a normal situation. So as you see, they are examples that I've given with regards to situation awareness. Now, some other aspects of situation awareness that I want to cover, and that is important, is non-verbal communication or different communication styles. So what is non-verbal communication? And there's a definition of it inside there. Those aspects of communication such as gestures, facial expressions that don't involve verbal communication, but which may include non-verbal aspects of speech itself. So non-verbal communication, I'm only going to look at 4 different types. I think research has shown that there's 7. But the 4 different types that I would like to look at are body language, facial expression, personal appearance and touch. And with regards to personal safety and security, these are good triggers for me to actually consider when I'm dealing with it. So firstly, body language. The conscious and unconscious movement and postures by which attitudes and feelings are communicated. So here's our guy sat at his desk. Does that body language, does that gait, does that posture say anything other than I'm bored, I'm sick? It doesn't show that I'm vibrant, I'm happy, let's get up and get it. Facial expressions, however, do support that. And here we have people smiling, and they're out socialising. But we look at facial expressions, and they help give us an indication as to people's feelings and their activities. What they're trying to communicate. And there we look at these four, and they're trying to communicate happiness. They're not trying to communicate, or they could be, but generally speaking, we would look at that and say, there's 4 happy people. Personal appearance. How do we appear? And our appearance could be our physical appearance, how we're dressed, but also it could be how we act, whether we're staggering, whether we're walking, whether our speech is slurred, we're stupefied, or, as in this case, whether we're carrying a bottle of rum. What does that mean? What is that carrying of a bottle of rum say from a non-verbal communication? He hasn't said that he's drunk, but from a situation awareness perspective, we should be able to identify that there is the potential, because it's part drunk, that he could be drunk, and we should be able to identify that if he is drunk or under the influence of alcohol, there is a potential for increased likelihood of violence and or argument and or conflict. And I'm showing this slide here, and this touch. And touch can be from a partner. It can show loving. It can highlight a wide range of things. But equally, touch could be an unacceptable invasion of space. So touch as a non-verbal communication is a powerful tool, because it again helps you form an opinion as to what is happening or what is presenting itself. So, why is non-verbal communication important for personal safety? Really, what research has shown is between 70 and 90% of communication is non-verbal. Being able to interpret non-verbal communications can potentially give you that added advantage of being able to correctly identify the situation that's presenting itself. It can help you understand, and it can help you make informed decisions, supported by other things, but being able to interpret non-verbal communication as part of your situation awareness is a great strength that we have, because the more you can know, the more you can identify, the greater the likelihood is that you can avoid and you can take steps to prevent yourself becoming a victim. What I'd like to do is just move on to the next slide. There's a few more slides in situation awareness, because non-sensory situation awareness is where we're not looking at our senses giving us that information. And it's important because this rests with the brain. It's all about knowledge and understanding of information. It helps to support levels of alertness and the preparation of your senses. So, for example, local crime rates, any local media or news that's happening, anything that's trending on social media regarding activities, regarding festivities, or even regarding local events, anything that can assist in the identification of what is normal activity and any changes in that normality. So I'd like to give you an example, and being a Newcastle fan, I apologise for those of you who don't follow soccer or who really don't follow Newcastle or Sunderland, and why on earth would you? But here's an example. Whenever there is a Newcastle and Sunderland derby, we know that the both fans get together and there is an increased likelihood of conflict. As a matter of fact, crime trends and patterns clearly show and identify that's the case. On local media, the police are warning that there is a risk of violence and are advising fans not to engage in violence and to avoid the city centre. So there's a whole load of non-sensory information that's being given to me that enables me to assess the situation. Now, if I were to take my wife to a restaurant and I was going to go in the city centre, is there an increased risk of violence, disruption, and actually our evening being spoilt? And the answer is yes. So I've used non-sensory situation awareness to decide to go to a country pub and have a real good evening and score brownie points with my wife, which I always like doing. So, just to summarise situation awareness, because I think, as I've said right at the start, to me, situation awareness is the cornerstone of personal safety and security. The benefits of being situationally aware are it gives the opportunity to proactively identify potential threats. Okay. It reduces the chances of you being caught unaware, and it enables you to take proactive risk avoidance measures to prevent you from being a victim. Without good foundations, and utilising situation awareness as the foundation for your protective layers, and that's your activities and everything else, then there's an increased likelihood that vulnerabilities and threats may be missed. So situation awareness means that it gives you that early heads up, that ability to readily identify and to proactively take steps to avoid. So I think training for men, training for women, training for personal safety and security is important. Certainly when I was looking after places overseas, again, it didn't matter whether you're male or female. In some places, there are increased risks for men. As a matter of fact, I think the demographics show that if you are a young male, you are far more likely than any other age group to become the victim of violent crime. Do I think that men should be taught, for example, about things that we're discussing here? Yeah. The one thing I'd say with regards to personal safety and security, or with regards to any aspect of security and protection, is the more you can increase people's level of knowledge and awareness, the greater the likelihood is that it will have a positive effect. So therefore, I strongly encourage continual information, even whether it's subliminal, and if that's in relation to how to prevent, reduce risk attacks, and that's males conducting attacks on females. But really, it's a much deeper question. I always have to say that I know in the 1980s, when I was in my early 20s, my approach to women was different to what I saw and experienced as a police officer in the 1990s. I've got to say that my son's he's just left university, and the level of respect and diversity in his view and his knowledge is far superior. It's viewed as accepted. And so I think slowly we are changing. We are changing perceptions and culture. There is more work to do, and it's a continuous process. But I think, yes, everybody, so I'm not going to say men, I think everybody should be trained in personal safety and security. And if that means covering aspects like this, I think that's very important. There's times when it can't, you maintain your predictability. But what I would say is that how you conduct yourself, your level of awareness, by being aware that you are being predictable, is a positive step. Because if you are aware that you're part of your routine, the one thing to say, and I'll cover this during commuting, is be aware that this is your normal routine. That still doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't be looking for things that are not normal? Is what is presented one of normality? Well, it could very well be that there's somebody new on the bus who's staring at you. It could very well be that when you walk home, that actually somebody stood on the corner and is making notes. So you can be, to a degree, predictable. What I'm trying to say is avoid routines where possible. But as part of that predictability, it should enable you to identify changes in normality in your area, which should cause you to think, okay, that isn't normal. Why is that person stood there? Just to give you an example, Saturday morning, 2 weeks ago, I opened my curtains and I saw a car with somebody in a high-vis vest. This was 5:30 in the morning. That's not normal. I watched, I made a note. But actually I then was comfortable when the car pulled up in front of a neighbour's house who was then going for his medical, because he gets kidney dialysis every day. But I didn't know that vehicle. I didn't know why somebody in a high-vis vest was in our cul-de-sac, and it wasn't normal. So there's a sort of example to, I suppose, the routine of me getting up every Saturday morning and opening the blinds. That wasn't normal. And so the same can be said with regards to commuting, but I will discuss commuting in a bit more detail. I'm not going into endorsements or recommendations. What I would say is that crime prevention sites, as in governmental ones, have lists of different personal attack alarms. I think what they normally say is that if you have one that's over 95 decibels, or if it's over the 100 decibels, it's going to directly impact anybody coming near you, and the whole idea is it's going to disorientate, which then enables certain other actions to take. They have a use. Whether they would be able to be used in the heat of the moment is something that only individuals will be able to say and identify. This is a difficult one for me to answer diplomatically. I have friends in the media. I'm aware of some distortion of media from the facts, but equally I am aware of the vital part that media can play in informing people of situations that present themselves, inform themselves of activities that have happened, of being used correctly to get information out to a wider audience and to receive information from that wider audience. And Crime Stoppers is an absolutely brilliant example of how that works. There are some media outlets, individuals, or social media sites that see it, for whatever reason, appropriate to either distort or provide misinformation, which I think is dangerous, and I personally would like to see the government clamping down on it, because it can create panic, it can create confusion, and it can put people at harm or danger. So the vast majority of media is very, very responsible, and it's a great source and great supporter of protection and personal safety, because it provides that information. It's just a small minority, and what can we do? Well, we can unsubscribe to those media outlets, or the government could adopt a more robust approach to intentional misinformation. What I'm going to now talk about is proactive protective practices. Just for everybody's information, I'm happy to stay on the call, although I have said that I'd finish at 3:30, and I hope technology allows us to stay as we can. So what I want to quickly do is look at proactive protection practices. These are things that will help you as an individual, your family, and prevent and help protect you. Now, one of the first things I want to talk about is violence indicators. And I and my company teach personal safety and security and workplace violence. And some indicators are typical. Again, this is not academic. This is me speaking as a practitioner. But what you can notice is that there are some verbal and some non-verbal violence indicators. So, for example, the voice pitch. There's times when the voice pitch will actually, there'll be a higher pitch to the voice before somebody becomes violent. There'll be an increased speed of speech, and part of this is because adrenaline starting to flow through the body because they're getting in preparation. Breathing changes. So, for example, all of a sudden I'm getting really angry now, and you've upset me so much, and I'm really you've had, oh look, what's happening? I'm starting to gesticulate as well, and sometimes it could be my stance becomes more aggressive. I adopt the stance of a boxer, and they always say a boxer stance. Well, people do adopt that because it's easier then to launch an attack. However, there are people who don't demonstrate that, who don't give that telltale sign. There are some people, and I've actually seen it, who they start muscle twitching and trembling before fighting. Now, is that just the excitement? Is it adrenaline? But I've literally seen people's necks pulsating immediately before they actually commit a violent act. Some of the old things of people clenching their fists, it's an illustration. Okay, I'm going to fight you, and they start bouncing. Their fixation on the victim. Normally, if somebody's about to attack somebody, unless they're trying subterfuge, they become focused, and then they look at that individual. So their voice is higher. They're looking at that individual. They're becoming. So all of these things can indicate, and I use the term can, indicate that there's violence going to take place. Okay. How do we actually avoid? If we see them sort of things, what do we want to do? Now, you'll notice I use the word conflict avoidance. And everything I try to teach with regards to conflict management, as other people, is avoidance. Because I don't want anybody to get into a conflict situation unnecessarily. I want to avoid it at the earliest opportunity. I want to avoid conflict by actually understanding how an attack takes place. I want to avoid conflict by being situationally aware and identifying in advance potential conflict situations. There are some things that I think we should try and avoid when we see and when we sense a conflict situation developing. And one of the things I'm saying, showing disinterest. So if somebody is becoming verbal, is becoming agitated, is in your face, and they want your attention, they want to remonstrate with you, they're salivating, and you become dismissive, instead of avoidance, that could actually become a conflict accelerator. So I always try to, do not show disinterest. Okay, you've got my attention. And you've got my attention because I want to stay safe. I want to avoid conflict. Sometimes difficult for people to do. But try not to raise your voice. Try to stay calm. Or at least portray a level of calmness. Wow, don't understand. Why? Staring back. Okay, staring back in nature. A stare. If you have a pet cat or a pet dog, you stare at them. There may be a response coming from them, but staring is seen as a challenge, and again, that could be a conflict escalator as opposed to a calmer of the situation. Avoid goading. If you can see that somebody is getting agitated, is seeking conflict, maybe seeking violence, if you goad them, don't be stupid, I don't care what you say, you're an idiot. That is potentially the trigger that they need to turn from potential conflict into violence. And again, what we're trying to do is avoid conflict. So consider about goading. Consider about aggressive behaviour. Well, come on then. You want to have a go at me? Let's have it out now. Everyone watching, all of a sudden, you might have no intentions, but your aggressive behaviour may again be that conflict tipper from being able to avoid it, being able to calm the situation into an aggressive and violent act. Making false threats. All right, yeah, well, my family will come and sort you out. I've got the police. I've got them on speed dial. Yeah? You want to keep having a go at me? Let me phone them. As a former police officer, I've actually seen it where police officers have said, look, I'm a police, I'll just call the guys. And that has resulted in, in negative aspects of them actually being assaulted. Don't make false threats. Don't say, I will call the police. And then actually, if there's a conflict situation, you say, I will call the police. And they think, actually, no, you won't. And if you won't follow through with that action, that could again turn, it means they've got the empowerment. They can say, okay, well, that was just a false threat. Now I'm going to take things further. These are just simple things to try and avoid a conflict. And what I always say is, don't offer to fight. Nobody wins, and you could very well be injured seriously or otherwise. Or the flip side is you could injure somebody, and all of a sudden you're facing charges when you could have actually avoided the conflict in the first situation. We will come on to actions to take, but what I'd like to do is talk about socialising. And this gets quite emotive because people say, why are you trying to impact on what I do in my social life? I'm not. What I'd like to do is try and give advice and guidance to mean that you can actually socialise in a safe and secure way. So the first thing that I always say to people when they're thinking about socialise is know before you go. Understand, use your non-sensory situation awareness. Where am I going? What's the situation like in there? Was there a fight there last week? Do I really want to be going there? Was there some trouble? Did the police come and raid the place? These are sort of things when it's socialising, you think, well, actually, is this really the place I want to go? 9.5 times out of 10, of course it is. But no one understand what's happening in the area. Are there any events taking place? Are there football matches taking place? Are there things that can directly impact you having a good time with your friends? Let others know. It's not a nanny state, and to be truthful, if I'm going out socialising, I'll tell the wife. If my son's going out, I'll ask, okay, where you going? And it isn't any control mechanisms, but actually what it does, it provides top cover. Whenever we talk about socialising, I always, one of the things I always say is, okay, have you got communications? Have you got a telephone that's charged and that you can phone a taxi? You can phone me if there's a problem. Or we can phone you to make sure that you're okay. Transportation. Think about transporting. Are you going to drive? Are you going to take a taxi? Are you walking? Is the public transport available? And these are very, very simple little things, but if you think about them and you consider them, it might actually reduce the risk. So, for example, what time's the last bus? I don't know. I don't take buses. But equally, if I drive, I don't drink. These sort of things are great. If you're driving, think about where you're going to park. If you're going to use the well-lit CCTV covered car park that's within 2 minutes walk of the social area, isn't that great? If, however, you want to consider an alleyway that's 200 metres away from the first pub that you would reach, and there's no lighting, but it's free of charge, that's the sort of thing I would say consider, because by considering and by understanding the risks that exist and by being situationally aware, you can avoid or potentially avoid unnecessary risks from occurring. On the socialise, one of the two of the things, what's my intentions when I go socialising? I am not an angel, and I do like a drink, but normally I'll have 3-4 pints, and the age that I am, that's probably sufficient. It could be that I have an intention of going out with my mates from 6 o'clock through till 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to drink the whole time, and I know that I'm going to be drunk. Well, if that's the case, what's my intentions? Is there somebody who's the designated driver? Is there somebody who out of the group of you is saying, actually, I'm not drinking, so I'll keep top cover. I'll watch out for everybody. I'll make sure that you're safe, and at the end of the night, I'll make sure that we all get back home safely, either by taxi or I'll drive. Think about what your intentions are, and actually, help that form any risk management decisions that you take. And I'm not saying that you do it every time, but I'm saying these are things to consider with regards to activities. And the final point with socialising is getting home. How am I going to get home? Recommendation for me is always have it pre-arranged. Then you're not worrying about missing the last taxi or the taxi rank being empty or having to walk home. If you do have to walk home, or you live close enough to walk home, how are you going to walk home? And what I always say is, very, very simple, very basic, but make sure you're walking, towards oncoming traffic. So one, you can see the lights and they can see you, and if anything is untoward, you can take a step to avoid being hit. When if you're walking and there's traffic coming up behind you, you don't know what can happen. You don't know what's happening, and potentially you're not going to be able to, through situation awareness, see somebody who's conducting surveillance, i.e. driving around the block 3 or 4 times in the same car, wearing the same clothes. Okay, getting home is with social lines is something we always say. If we can get top cover, fabulous. When you're going out exercising, exactly the same. Know before you go, where are you going? Let others know where you're going. If you're going for a 15-mile run out in the country, it's important to let others know, because what if you trip? What if you fell? They'd want to know where the start point is to start looking for you, even from a safety point of view, let alone from a violence point of view. Think about how you're getting to and from there, and when you get to wherever you're going exercising, are you going to be there by yourself? You're going to be with a group. And one of the things I always say is that how hard is the exercising? Because I know I play squash for an hour. When I come, my sensory awareness is really low because I'm shattered. You have to take care. You have to consider. Let me give you an example, and this is a real genuine example. In the Middle East, a female colleague decided to go running, and even though they'd been advised, and this is going slightly contrary to what I say about what you wear and things like that, but in some countries there is a legal requirement or there is a desire for you to dress more conservatively. The individual went running in very short shorts and a vest top. She was assaulted coming back. Thankfully, it wasn't too severe, and she was able to get away. So there was no molestation. There was attempts at grabbing at her. Now, think about where you're exercising, what you're doing. On this call, there are people from around the world, and they will understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that in London or in the streets of Newcastle, you should think about what you're wearing. But what I'm saying is you should think about the broader setting that you may be in, and if appropriate, consider your activities and also what you're doing. And the same goes for men. The same goes for boys and everything like that. But it's something to be aware of, because sometimes the cultural acceptance is totally different. Safe travel and commuting, and this was raised. So know before you go. You do, because this is the route you take every single day. To a degree, that's very helpful, because you know and understand what is normal and what isn't normal. If your commute changes, do you let others know? When you commute, what is it, the same transportation that you use? What is it, bus, is it tram, etc.? If we look at this image, you commute every day and there's never anybody else in. There's one gentleman sat behind you. Now, it's a gentleman sat behind you. You notice, you recognise it. There's nothing to say that that gentleman is going to be anything other than a worker or anything other than using the transport. But being able to recognise that is an important element. What I'd say, and I flagged this up, is don't drop your guard when you're on a public transport, because again, you should still be looking for what is normal, what isn't normal. And again, just what I'd like to say on the commuting side, I've worked with colleagues around the world, and there are certain countries, there was a workforce of over 30 females, and when I asked and discussed how safe they felt commuting to and from, I was really, really shocked at the level of intimidation, harassment and molestation that actually occurred. I think there was one out of the group who'd never experienced it. So safe travelling and commuting, there is a need to stay safe. In the UK, the risks and likelihood are far, far lower with regards to all aspects of violence against the female than elsewhere. But we can't drop our guards. This one, safe travel on longer journeys. To be truthful, I spent 2 or 3 days talking about this. It is a specific area because the risks are different. 3 primary things. Firstly, know before you go. Do your research before you travel, and that's even if it's a long journey in country. If you know where you're going, great. If you know where the hotels are, that's fine. How are you getting there? Are there any issues with the place that you're travelling to or from? If you're travelling for work, remember, organisations have a duty of care to look after and protect their staff when travelling on behalf. And we have a duty of care to ensure that we provide a safe working environment. Now, some people will laugh at me, but if any of my staff, male or female, travel overseas, they all travel with door wedges. Very simple, very stupid, but actually, there's some hotels where we stay, because we don't stay in 5-star hotels, contrary to many people's beliefs, where these have actually come in very, very useful. Torches. I make sure staff have got torches. I make sure that they have communications, and I have ways of communicating with them, and that we have a communicating routine established. So female journeys, and I think there was a conference, a presentation earlier on. These are things that we can send a whole conference around, say, female travels, and we do. But what I would say is that there is a duty of care. Letting others know is crucial. Let others know in your family, but also let others know where you go and what you're doing. And the reason being, if anything goes wrong, and not just from a violence, but from a safety perspective, if you're injured or you end up in hospital, let others know. Contact the embassy. Be in touch, and try to ensure that there's a ways of communication, but others know your routine when you intend to come back. I've mentioned about communications. Transportation is a biggie. when travelling overseas, and safe travelling and transportation overseas. So firstly, flights. What aircraft are you using, and are they safe? Taxis. Are taxis safe, or is it better to use a transportation provided by the hotel accommodation? Just to give you an example, in Venezuela, more than 10 years ago, somebody was travelling out to do a kidnap for ransom conference, and he was met at the airport by somebody holding up his name on a boarding card, and he got in the taxi with them. It was false. Somebody had supplied the criminals with his name. He was stopped, guns put to his head, asked for his PIN numbers. He was left in his boxer shorts and a pair of socks. They said they would be back. Sure enough, they took whatever cash they could from his account, came back, gave him $20 and told him that don't let the taxi drivers charge you more than 10, otherwise they're robbing you. I don't know whether that was their sick way of getting it, but that stuck with me because, yes, taxis can and can't be safe, and levels of driving, quality of driving differ around the world. The steps that you take in reducing the risks in using public transport and using taxis are a great help. Trains and coaches, again, it's you want to reduce your level of risk and exposure to risk or your vulnerability. I always say try to avoid travelling late at night. It can't be helped sometimes, especially internationally. And if you are travelling, try to stay in a carriage that's occupied. I see no issue whatsoever in if the last person gets out of your carriage and there's 10 people in the carriage next door, and you feel it's a mixed crowd, you're going into that one because the safety in numbers and there's a degree of protection. Socialising when you're travelling, there are some additional threats, and that's caused by the fact that you don't know. You don't know the area. You haven't got that local knowledge. Take extra care. The rules, protective measures that you apply for socialising in the UK should equally apply while you're overseas. I've just tried to compress some very, very simple advice and guidance. To be truthful, I've wrote booklets with regards to this. There are great materials out there, and it's taken sensible, proactive measures. If you add these to understanding the different threats that exist and understand how a criminal's mindset can work, and you add these with situation awareness, the level of resilience and robustness in your own personal protection plan is really genuinely increased. I said right at the start that we don't have all the answers and sometimes it goes wrong. So what I'd like to do is break it into two sides: conflict without violence and that with violence. So conflict avoidance strategies. First thing I'm going to say is that try to remain calm. Really difficult to do because adrenaline's rushing through and what's going to happen to you. The second point there, breathe and think space. Again, you might think, why is he telling me to breathe? We all breathe. Well, actually, it's that breathing to oxygenate the brain, to keep that thought process. Breathe and think. And the idea is that you want to create space between yourself and the potential cause of conflict. Communicate. How do you communicate with the other? I've already said things to avoid. Do you speak in a raised voice? Try to communicate calmly. Try to keep your tone mellow. I don't understand what's gone wrong. You have to help me understand here. Why are you being aggressive towards me? Stance. You may not say it, but my hands were up. So my hands are up. It's not submissive. It's actually defensive. But what it does do is my stance is such that I'm minimising my exposure to direct harm. My hands are up because there's a barrier. This is my space. Don't invade my space. Non-verbal communication. Try not to demonstrate fear, because that's sometimes the thing that they actually want to achieve, because they can then control you. So try to stay calm. Try to read their non-verbal communications. Try to calm and communicate so you're calming the situation down as much as you can. You want to go from that orange back down to that green level. Support if available. If there's others in the room, seek their support. Try to get them in with you to help you. And leave the area of safe to do so. And I say this when I talk about workplace violence. People say to me, yeah, but it's my job, I've got to stay there. No, you don't. No boss pays you to become the victim of violence. Okay? Leave them. There you go. I'm leaving the space. You're safe, which is the priority. And what we say, move to a place of safety as soon as possible. This could be an office. It could be out in a public space. It could be inside a church, a museum, a police station. Okay, so move to a place of safety as soon as possible. And the important thing is you're creating that space. You're disengaging, and that's important, because when we look at violence, the disengagement is a really, really important aspect. So one thing to say is fear and shock are reality where violence is instigated. It will happen. Breathe. I'll use that term again, but it's that breath helps you retain a degree of control. And this is, again, easy for me to say, and it depends very much on the level of violence that's being exerted. Try to disengage and create space. Okay, you do not want to be in the grips of potentially a stronger aggressor, and you want to disengage, because if you disengage, space is a protective measure. The more space you can create between you and the aggressor, the less likelihood is they can actually instigate and affect violence against you. So we always say create as much space as possible. Try to avoid being taken to the ground. Again, easier said than done, but if you're on the ground, the likelihood of control is far greater, and violence can be exerted, or any other activity. So at all costs, try to avoid being taken to the ground, and what you're trying to do is get away. One of the questions that people ask me is fight or flight. Should I fight or should I flight? Now, I'm going to caveat this. Now, what I would say is that I always say flight. If you can get away, disengage. Because the reality is that normally a male is physically stronger, and they may very well have that degree of greater degree of aggression. So you want to disengage. You want to actually create that space, right? Fighting, unless you have no other alternative, I would always say get away. Vocalize, scream, and try to attract attention. 4 times in my life, I've heard what referred to as the death scream. It's a scream that you will never forget if you hear it. It's somebody has so much fear, or they're in a situation that's so precarious that somebody's life is in danger. Scream, vocalize, try to attract attention. And there's some very good advice on the Susie Lamplugh website. And it's if you scream help, firstly it's a single word, single syllable, I think. Whereas if you use multiple words, there's a great likelihood of somebody hearing them multiple words and being able to connect the meaning and messaging behind. Help! Call the police! Is better than help! Help! You're saying the same, but actually you're saying more, and you're increasing the likelihood of somebody coming to your help and support. Try to maintain space. If you have been able to disengage, keep some distance between you and the aggressor while screaming, while trying to call for help the whole time. Last thing you want to do is corner yourself and let them close down that space. And move to a place of safety as soon as possible. It makes sense, but if you can get that disengagement, get away from the area, go to a place of safety. Go to a takeaway, go to a taxi rank, go to a pub or a bar where there's door staff. Anywhere where you can go, where there's multiple people who may support you, who may actually then prevent or deter the aggressor from continuing their act. Now there are some caveats and some observations that I want to make. And again, I'm not an expert. I've seen violence against individuals, and it's absolutely horrendous. I've seen violence against women, which is equally, if not worse, although the level of violence in some cases has been far less. But when we talk about violent disengagement, some caveats: duration of attack. How long's a piece of string? A lot will depend on the intentions of the aggressor as to how long an attack. Generally speaking, if it's a stranger, they may want just to inflict that assault, that damage, or steal, rob, etc. And they don't want to be caught. So a duration of attack may very well be reduced. Okay, the longer you can create that disengagement, the more you can disengage, the greater the likelihood is that the duration of attack will be shortened. And part of this may very well be because they do not expect a positive response. The attacker may very well only expect control and submission. And the more you can go against that, the more surprised they would be as to your response. Use of violence. How a victim responds to violence is, the aggressor intention is normally to control through violence. Receiving violence back is often not something that they expect. However, what I will say is, if you use violence back, yes, you could create that space to disengage. Equally, it could result in increased violence being used against you. It's certainly one of those where people say to me, should I respond with violence? And I will not give a definitive answer, because in many cases it is down to the individual and their characteristics. Equally with weapons, should you use weapons? What if they've got weapons? If they've got weapons, it could mean that it's easy to comply. If you've got a weapon, what if they take it off you and actually cause you greater harm? Again, it's one of these things where it could be a double-edged sword. It could be positive. Equally, it could result in greater harm to you as an individual. What if there's a suspected sexual motivation for the attack? I've had to deal with cases where there's been the sexual motivation, and again, it's not right for me as a male. It's not right for me as somebody who doesn't know you as an individual, or the individuals who are carrying out the attack, or how they are carrying out the attack, as to what actions you can or should take. It depends as an individual whether you are wanting to fight, whether you think that fighting is the most appropriate course, whether the sexual invasion is to a degree more acceptable than the loss of life. And I don't say that lightly. Colleagues female colleagues who've written books have actually expressed exactly the same. Violence and disengagement caveats, but what I would say is that these are horrendous situations, and it's difficult for any man to put ourselves in your position. Kidnap for ransom. There's a key word here, and that's kidnap for, and that's ransom. And the ransom normally means there's a financial aspect to it. So they're seeking monetary gain. So if kidnap is for monetary gain, is it the fact that you could be released once money is paid? You don't know the level of violence that's used, and it could be that actually they renege on that. Equally, that ransom could be paid. I'll quickly look about kidnap for exploitation. Very similar, but what is the type of exploitation? Genuine fear of death. So on this one, if you are attacked and you have a genuine fear of death, what do I recommend doing? I can't give a definitive thing, but what I would say is if you genuinely fear for your life, you can legally use whatever means for self-protection that are reasonable to survive. Okay, and no jury would, if the circumstances are clearly presented and clearly articulated and clearly shown, that you genuinely feared for your life, and that's why you did A, B, or C. Really, it's down to you as an individual. But I would always say, if you genuinely fear for your life, use whatever means you can to stay alive. Trauma can be recovered from. You can't recover if you're dead. It sounds simplistic, but I give exactly the same. With regards to this, I give exactly the same advice for males as well as females, apart from when it looks at the sexual motivation for attack because of the low cases. And finally, what I'd say is think forensics. If you are the victim, if you are involved in a fight, don't rush home, have a shower, clean yourself, put your clothes in the wash. Think. The advances in forensics nowadays are so great that you really what we want to do is contain and prevent somebody else from becoming the victim. So by thinking forensic, by seeking police, by ensuring that swabs are taken, any hair or fibres that exist, there's a greater likelihood of others being prevented from being a victim like you've been. It's easy for me to say, sat here, but it is something that I would ask people to think about. The last two slides is I just want to quickly talk about post-incident actions. So if there is an incident, what should you be doing? Firstly, should minimise the exposure to any further harm. Okay, get yourself away from the area as soon as possible. Get yourself to a place of safety and seek medical emergency attention if needed. Talk about it. Seek support from trusted families and friends. Report the incident. You do not want, I certainly don't want anybody else to suffer trauma that I would feel if I was the victim. And so I always support reporting the incident. Understand yourself that you've gone through a traumatic experience and consider welfare support and medical assistance. Because ultimately, nobody asks to be a victim. Now, I've quickly rushed through something that normally would take, I'd say half a day to discuss. I hope that this practical advice, one, is seen as practical, but two, when you add it with the other elements that we've discussed earlier, it starts to make sense. I'm very mindful that we're overrunning, but I'd like to see if there's any questions at this stage. Okay, so firstly, it's a great question in the sense that you've identified through situation awareness that somebody is following you. So firstly, don't dismiss it. What I always used to say is, if you see somebody once, okay. If you notice them twice, if you see them 3 times, that is not normal. Okay, that's a red flag to me. So if somebody is following you, why they're following you? Have they sent any social media contact? Are they known to you? Are they doing it out of annoyance, or are they, is there some other motive that behind why they're following you? Your disruption, so changing routine, you can do that. Obviously, if you're travelling to and from work, it may very be that last thing you want to do is to spend half an hour travelling on a different route. Being aware of it, actually speaking to somebody in your family and your friends about it, question I would always ask is, how do you feel? Do you feel threatened by it? Do you feel intimidated by it? If so, reach out, and express your concerns to the police. I can't answer for any police response, but if I'm the superintendent in charge of a station and somebody comes to me pointing out, look, this has happened, I don't know whether it's anything, I don't know whether it's nothing, I'm not going to brush it under the carpet. That's the sort of information that I might want to know. The reason why reporting it is important is you might have experienced that, so might 5 other people in that area. All of a sudden, there actually could be a predator, there could be a perpetrator who is in there, and thankfully nobody has been attacked at this stage. It can bring it together, all them little snippets of information can create good intelligence that can be acted upon. Okay, so this is difficult, raw and very current. I think trust in the police service by many women has to a degree been deteriorated and directly impacted by the murder of Sarah Everard. If somebody is in a position of trust, they are in a position of trust. We have tens of thousands of police officers in the UK who day in, day out risk their lives to keep us safe. In all sectors of the community, there are going to be people who are wayward. There are going to be people who do not conform to expected. And unfortunately, what's happened is a situation where that trust that we all should have in police officers is now being questioned. Do I personally think we should have that mistrust? No, I don't. Because 99.999% of police officers are there to serve us and to protect us. I would ask 2 questions. Firstly, why is a police officer asking me to get into their car? Is that police officer by themselves? It could very well be that your car's broken down at the side of the road. The police officer pulls up and says, "Okay, I'll give you a lift." Is that a fair thing for the police officer to do? Yeah. Is it a fair thing for you to say, "Look, I'm just going to tell my mum that you've picked me up and a police officer, 572, I've just got in the car with this lovely police officer, 572, and he's going to give me a lift home." There are ways of ensuring information is collected. Do I think it's appropriate to tar all police officers with one brush? No. Do I believe it's appropriate around the world? Then what I would say is that the level of trust in our police service is far higher than elsewhere in the world, and the levels of corruption elsewhere in the world, organised crime, involvement in organised crime, involvement in trafficking, etc., is far greater. We have a great police service, and it has been tarnished, its reputation has been tarnished, but I know that it's admired around the world. I speak to colleagues regularly about our police service, and what happened is a shock, and it's unacceptable and it's despicable, but it is one of those freak events that thankfully is not a regular occurrence. I hope that answers your question, but that's my genuine thoughts. It's difficult. Something is better than nothing. In the sense of, you may, as a female, you might not have confidence in your abilities and capabilities for that disengagement element. Do I think self-defense classes are a good idea? I think that there is a place for them, but I think knowledge and awareness are far greater protective measures than having to use self-defense. And the reason I say that is very simple. Awareness and practical avoidance are proactive actions. They prevent, if you can identify and prevent putting yourself in a situation of harm, that's far better than having to react to or relying upon your capabilities to react to an incident. There is a place for it, but I'm very mindful, irrespective of whether it's male or female. People say, okay, I've been trained, I'm this, and it sometimes gives them a false sense of security or belief in their capabilities. Violent crime is not like that, and whatever techniques are taught are normally based upon a sequence being adopted. Violence is unpredictable, and it may or may not work. It may or may not antagonise the situation. If you're walking in the dark, well, firstly you might trip over. So torches are a great tool because they help you see, which helps you avoid obstacles or things in the ground. But also, if you were walking and you were in the dark and there was an aggressor there, they would know that you're there. Whereas a torch enables you to actually shine, illuminate. Potentially, you're utilising that, if need be, as an escape route. So I don't think torches will attract attention. A criminal with intent will already know you're there, and if anything, if they fear discovery, or if there's a likelihood that you can shine a torch, they may think, I don't want to be discovered, I'll go else. I'll go for the person who doesn't have a torch. I'm not saying that they're the answer for everything, but from a safety and security perspective, if you're in a dark area, I'd always say carry a torch. Well, pepper spray, is that right? Did I get that right? Right, so pepper spray is illegal in the UK. So that's not an issue, and so if you have it, there's a greater likelihood of you being arrested than the perpetrator. Again, many of these items, the personal attack alarms, the torch, any sounders or anything like that, are, dare I say it, they're more effective as a confidence, giving you internal confidence, than to a degree their capabilities of protecting against a third party. If you're in a country where pepper spray is allowed, is it effective? Yes. I think my eyes smarted for about 2 weeks afterwards. And it was a very, very unpleasant experience, and I wouldn't wish that to receive that at all. But again, it's one of those, are you going to have the time to get out the pepper spray? Are you in a state or a country where actually you can have a firearm? The same question can be asked, well, is it appropriate for you to have a firearm and use that? These are difficult questions, and a lot depends on skills, training, capabilities. You as an individual, if I asked my wife to hurt somebody to save me, she'd probably question it for about half an hour, by which time I'd probably be severely injured, because that just isn't her character. She just cares and isn't that sort of person who would see herself as hurting somebody. So again, the use of non-lethal weapons. Firstly, is it legal? Secondly, has training been received? Thirdly, do you want it used on yourself? Because if somebody takes it off you, and then you then become the victim of the weapon that you're hoping is going to protect you. So I think it's one of those where, unfortunately, I have to sit on the fence and say that would be down to personal choice. What I'd like to do now is just to conclude things. Firstly, my apologies for going over time. Hopefully, what I've outlined is going to be of benefit. As I say, I'm a firm advocate of proactive prevention rather than reactive responses. And the more we can identify in advance potential harm to ourselves or to others, the greater opportunities we have to avoid it and to stay safe. Can I say that violence against women is going to stop? Unfortunately not. But equally, neither is violence against men, neither is violence against children. The likelihood of being a female victim of violence in the UK is relatively low. The likelihood of being a female victim of violence in the UK at the hands of a stranger is even lower. So I want to put that into context. Change will come. It will happen, but it's going to involve everybody. And so hopefully, if what I've discussed over the past 3 hours has enabled you to take away little bits of knowledge that you may want to consider, then it's been worthwhile my time. What I would say is that if anybody, we're going to send an email to all attendees and asking whether people would, one, be happy to give us feedback on what's been said, and I'm mindful that we've lost 3/4, but I'm still happy that we've still got 55 people on the call. But also, if you would like to receive any information or any handouts that we do create, if we do create it, then please let us know. So Valentina will send an email to you via the Eventbrite and just outlining those details. And I can be contacted via LinkedIn, but I'd like to thank you all, and I hope you stay safe. There are a whole host of resources that are available. End Violence Against Women, the Susie Lamplugh Trust, victim support. So again, we'll include all of these details in any information that we share. But once again, thanks very much. And my details, I say, I'm on LinkedIn. That's my email address, and please feel free to contact me if you've got any questions. If there's anything that you would like to ask that you didn't ask today, or if I could help in any way, shape or form. Thank you. Have a great afternoon, and unless there's any more questions, I can see the chat flashing.
Not from my side.
Okay, so on that, thank you all and have a great day.